We're going to do something, try something a little different this morning. Going to try to do a little Bible trivia. And in your bulletins, there's a, can you put up the next slide? In the bulletins, there's a QR code in the sermon notes section. If you got a bulletin, you can scan that. If you don't have a bulletin, you can try to scan that. So there's like the first 20 that scan in, and like you'll have to, it'll take you to a link. You have to put like a name. You can use your own name, a pseudonym, whatever you want. And then like the first 20 that get in get to participate. If you don't really, if you don't get in or you don't necessarily know how to do all that, you can kind of write your answers down on the piece of paper. The questions will show up here. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, it's code's still there too. I have to find a. Is anybody in yet? 8 of 20 players. I got 8 people in. Cool. 9. There's 11 spots left. And this is specifically Bible trivia on Joshua. It's not a broad Bible trivia. This is on Joshua. I'm up to 12. While people are still logging in, we're continuing Tom's sermon series on Bible stories that don't grow old. And today's Bible story main character is, of course, Joshua. And is this microphone fine? It's fine. I caught Julian's. Now I'm crackling. All right. Well, we've got 14 players. So we're gonna get started with the 14 that we've got here. So this is how this will work. I'll put up a question, and you have like 15 seconds to either type your answer in, whatever, or it might be there's a couple of them that are multiple choice. And so the faster that you put your answer in, the more points you get. So here we go. Oh, wow. We're at 20 of 20 players. Changed really rapidly there. Okay, here we go. Question number 1. Probably the most well-known battle Joshua fought in the land of Canaan. All right. And we'll see what the participants had to say. Jericho, we got 63%. Variety, a couple different spellings got. And of course, Jericho was the answer. All right, question number 2. What does the name Joshua mean? We've got a few different answers, and the actual answer is Jehovah is salvation. God saves is I don't know if I have a way to say that that's correct, because that's pretty close. So I don't see if there's a way for me to say that that's correct. But if you wrote God saves, good job. Next one. What other major Bible character has the same Hebrew name, but we pronounce it different? Think about the name, Jehovah saves. And All right, 100%. Yes, correct. Jesus. His better, more correct pronunciation would be Yeshua or Joshua. And number 4, how many times did the Israelites' army march around Jericho? And we got 7, we got 13, we got 10, we got 40. So marched around 7 days. 6 of the days was one time, and the 7th day was 7. So the correct answer is 13. All right, got just a couple more questions here. What statement is Joshua probably most known for? And let's see what we got. Yeah, good job on not choosing letter C. The correct answer, 65%. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And then, all right, let's see what you guys picked. All right. So the correct answer is, wait, how can there be 2 correct answers? I must have goofed when I was setting that up. The correct answer is made the sun and moon stand still for the whole day. The swallowing up of the enemy, that was a whole different kind of thing. Sorry about that. And then the last question is a little bit of a it's a creative one. You'll have to really think about this one. Probably should have given more time than 15 seconds, but here it is. How are Joshua and Melchizedek similar? So Melchizedek had no father or mother, and Joshua was the son of none. All right. You can go to the next slide, Nathan. Good job. Good job, you guys. I don't know if this shows like the players. I'm sure it does. I just haven't figured that part out yet. But oh, there it was. Show the. Oh, never mind. It doesn't work that way. All right. Well, thank you guys for playing. So today we are looking at Joshua. He is probably most known for leading the Israelites into the Promised Land, the land of Canaan, known for conquering the nations in and around the land of Canaan. But rather being known as a leader and as a conqueror, I think Joshua should be remembered more as a man of God because of his trust in God and because of his humble servanthood before God. Let's take a look at how the account of Joshua's life demonstrates his trust in God and his humble servanthood before God. So first, let's look at Joshua's trust in God. And thinking about this, it might be easy to dismiss Joshua's trust in God because, after all, Joshua, you think about it, he came out of Egypt, so he witnessed the amazing 10 plagues that God brought on the Egyptians. He walked through the parted Red Sea on dry ground. And as one of the trivia questions mentioned, he fought the Amalekites and witnessed God causing the sun and moon to stand still for a whole day, or basically the sun, of course, as we know, will always stand still, but basically the earth stopped rotating. But that God did that, he witnessed that. He witnessed God coming down in a thick cloud on Mount Sinai so that the mountain was enveloped. There was lightning and thunder. The mountain trembled, and God answered Moses in the thunder. He witnessed all of these things. So, I mean, if you had witnessed those things, don't you think you would have no problem trusting in God? But consider this. All of the other Israelites witnessed the exact same things, those that were with Joshua when they came out of Egypt and came up to the borders of the promised land. Every single one of those Israelites that were there had witnessed the exact same thing. And yet when Moses sent the 12 men to spy out the land, 10 of those men came back and said, "This land is filled with a strong people, with fortified cities. There's giants in the land. Yes, it's a good land, but we can't go up. We will not be successful." And the Israelites listened to them. It was Joshua and Caleb who said, "No, this land is a good land, and if the Lord is with us, we can take this land." Need to scroll here. In fact, when you read the account, it says that they tore their robes, emphasizing the mistake that the people were making by listening to those 10 spies that were saying that we can't go up. The people's response to Joshua and Caleb saying, "No, let's obey the Lord," their response was that Caleb and Joshua should be stoned. And it was only the glory of the Lord appearing before all the people that saved Joshua and Caleb. So each of those 10 spies and the whole congregation of Israel experienced the very same awesome demonstrations of God's power that Joshua and Caleb did. And yet they still didn't trust God. So apparently, demonstrations of God's power in our lives is not sufficient to produce in us hearts that trust in God. How about us? How well do we trust God? We have far more than Joshua had to base our trust in God, because we have the record of everything that God did in Joshua's lifetime and everything he did after that, even to sending his own son and everything through his apostles after that. We have experiences, if we have eyes to see the things that God has done, maybe in our own lives or in the lives of others, miraculous things that he's done. So, how good are we at trusting in God? I've heard people say, and maybe you've heard people say, maybe you've said something like this: if God does this one thing, or answers this one prayer, I will believe in God, I will trust in God. Have you ever heard people kind of talk like that? Let me say this again. Witnessing demonstrations of God's power in our lives is not sufficient. Even if it's something as mighty as something the Israelites witnessed, like the sun and moon standing still for a day, it's not enough to produce in us hearts that trust in God. We simply have to choose to trust no matter what. And that's what we see Joshua and Caleb. They witnessed everything that the Israelites did. The Israelites chose not to trust in God. Joshua and Caleb did. God does answer our prayers in his own way. And sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no, sometimes it's wait. Sometimes he answers in ways that we just can't comprehend or don't even see in our lifetime. But no matter what God does in our lives, he is looking for us to trust in him, to trust in his promises, and that he will be with us every step of the way until we fully enter into his eternal kingdom. So Joshua's trust in God stands as, I believe, one of his great characteristics. Before we move on to the second and last characteristic, there is something I found interesting, and it's many people have observed how that Joshua in the Old Testament leading God's people into the promised land is like a foreshadowing of Joshua or Jesus in the New Testament, who brings all who believe in him into God's eternal kingdom. But I'd never considered how Joshua's trust in God is kind of like a foreshadowing of the trust that Jesus had in his Father. In 1 Peter chapter 2, we read, "For you were called to this, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you should follow in his steps. He did not commit sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he was suffering, he did not threaten, but entrusted himself to the one who judges justly." Jesus entrusted himself to his Father, trusting in God's faithfulness and his promises enough to endure suffering and death. So let's continue on. We're going to take a look at one other of the great characteristics of Joshua, his humble servanthood before God. As I said earlier, Joshua is probably remembered for his role in leading the Israelites into the land of Canaan, and his leading the army and conquering the nations that were living there. He was a warrior. He didn't just send out the army to fight. He was in the thick of the battle. Here's a list of the nations and kings that Joshua led the Israelites in defeating: the Amalekites, the Midianites, the Ammonites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Jebusites, the Hittites, and Canaanites. He defeated 31 kings in the land of Canaan, and that's not to mention the kings that were on the other side of the Jordan before they entered the land of Canaan. Despite Joshua's amazing military accomplishments, I believe the broader story, though, is more about him being a humble servant before God than about him as a powerful warrior. Besides, we know from the scripture that it was clear that it was God who was fighting for the Israelites. You remember God's instructions to them when they were fighting Jericho is that everything was supposed to be devoted to the Lord for destruction, and Achan took some of those devoted things for himself, some gold and silver and a beautiful robe, and hid him in his tent. And then when the Israelites went to fight against the next city and the next king, they were defeated before their enemies. And it was because of that sin that had to be removed from among them. That was why they were defeated, because God had removed his power and his protection and blessing on them. So we know, that it was God going with the Israelites, but Joshua was their military leader. As we read the account of the Israelites coming out of Egypt and entering the land of Canaan, and we read of Joshua's involvement, it might not be readily apparent for us that one thing Joshua should be noted for is his humble servanthood before God. In the 17th chapter, Moses said to Joshua, "Choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, with Moses, while Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill. So remember that list of nations and the number of kings that Joshua defeated, he and the Israelites? Because we have that record and we just read through it all, those two verses maybe don't stand out like they should. We need to consider something very important. This battle that the Israelites had with Amalek was the very first battle for Joshua and the rest of the men. When I say their very first battle, I don't mean their first battle going into the land of Canaan. It was their very first battle ever. You recall that the Israelites had been slaves in Egypt, right? Do you think the Egyptians let the Israelites have weapons? Do you think that they would let them train for war? So the Israelites, if they had any training before this battle, it would have had to happen in the few short weeks between the time they came out of Egypt and crossed the Red Sea until the Amalekites came out to attack them. So when Moses says to Joshua, choose some men and go fight, Joshua has no fighting experience. But Joshua doesn't say, like Moses. Remember Moses, when God wants Moses to go to Pharaoh, he's like, send somebody else. I don't know how to speak. He was wanting somebody else to do it, making excuses because he didn't think he was qualified. But what was Joshua's response? Joshua, I lost my spot again. He didn't think, I'm not qualified, I'm not trained, I don't have the experience. Joshua just did as Moses asked him to do. The next example we have of Joshua, I think that's even maybe a little more intimidating, happens in the 13th chapter of Numbers. We read the account of Moses choosing the 12 to go into the land of Canaan to spy it out. When Joshua faced the Amalekites, there was an army of Israelites behind him, or with him. But Moses is now asking these 12 guys to go into the land of Canaan by themselves. And the land of Canaan, they've heard about all that God was doing for the Israelites, and they were not happy. They were not excited about these Israelites coming towards their borders. If those 12 men were discovered, I can't imagine them receiving a very hospitable welcome. I would imagine that they would have been killed or imprisoned. If you recall, when Joshua later sent 2 men to spy out Jericho, the king quickly discovered that while there's spies here, the Israelite spies to search out Jericho, if it hadn't been for Rahab, who hid them and then helped them to escape over the wall, those spies would have been either put to death or imprisoned. So this mission that Joshua and Caleb and all those other 10 were being sent on was a very dangerous, risky mission. But again, Joshua did as he was asked. The final thing, I guess, that really probably most illustrates Joshua's being a servant of God and in humility happens near the end of his life. Joshua, when he was well advanced in years, if your kids start saying, Mom or Dad, or Grandpa, Grandma, you're well advanced in years, they've just found a polite, catchy way of saying you're old. Joshua, when he was well advanced in years, gathered together all of Israel. And he relayed to them the word of the Lord as God had recounted for them all that he had done, how God had called Abraham and promised Abraham the land of Canaan, how he gave Abraham a son, Isaac, and to Isaac Jacob, how he had brought them out of Egypt and brought them through the Red Sea, how he had protected them and delivered their enemies and had given them all the nations and kings of the land of Canaan. Joshua chapter 24 summarizes it this way. And I sent the hornet before you, which drove them out before you, the 2 kings of the Amorites. It was not by your sword or by your bow. I give you a land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you dwell in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant. Joshua followed up this kind of recounting of all that God had done for them with a challenge. In verses 14 and following, he says, "Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." There's an important lesson about being a servant, and specifically God's servant, that we can learn from Joshua. Being a servant is not about the tasks or the work that we do. We see in Joshua's life that he did a lot of things for God, even we might say important or mighty things. But it isn't about what you do. Many people do things for other people, kind things, good things, and sometimes we just say, "Oh, they're just good people." I mean, there's people that do things for other people, but they're not happy about it the whole time they're doing it. They're resentful and grumbling. It's not about what the thing is that we're doing that makes us a servant. It's about the heart. It's about who we choose as Lord and Master of our life, who reigns over us, who we submit our plans and our will, our very life to. When you look back on all that Joshua did, it's like this big panoramic painting displaying choice after choice of surrendering himself and being obedient to God's call, to God's direction, and God's will for him. So Joshua's challenge challenges the people: choose who you're going to serve. Because the reality is you're going to serve a God or gods of some sorts. Who's it going to be? But just so you know, Joshua's saying, just so you know, just in case it hasn't been clear from my life up to this point, me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. That challenge by Joshua to the Israelites stands for us today. We don't have the same set of gods to choose from that they did in the ancient Near East, but we have plenty of gods today. They just look a little different. We don't have little statues, but they come in the form of money and pleasure, jobs, sports, relationships, power, even doing good things. If I were asked myself, I would have to confess that I have not consistently chose serving God over some of these other gods. How about you? But no matter how we answer that question, what we can all do today and what we all need to do today is to choose to serve God. If it's evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, then choose who or what you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The closing song that we're going to sing is a song of commitment that's based on Joshua's words. And any of us can sing that song if we genuinely mean it. Even though Joshua said, "Me and my house," every one of us can choose to serve God, whether the rest of our house, in our house, does or not. Whether it's a youth whose parents don't follow Christ, you can serve God and pray that one day your parents will. And maybe you're married to a spouse that is not a believer and does not follow Christ. You can choose to serve God and pray that one day your spouse will choose to serve God. Whatever our situation, we need to continue to choose to serve God. Would you please stand as we sing this last song?